Today I will be covering the English portion of the Practice 1 test from the ACT preparation book, questions number 46 through 75. Starting with question 46, we see that the sentence says, "Although both were built as walls intended to defend the city protectively and stood 10 meters tall, they were erected under different historical circumstances." So, we're looking at these four options. We've got walls intended to defend the city protectively, which is what we started with, defensive walls for defending the city, walls to provide defensive protection, and defensive walls. Now, if we look, the words defend and protect are inherently synonymous words. So, we can decide that option J here option F here is not going to be the correct answer because we don't want to say defend and protect. In option G, we have the words defend twice. Again, it's redundant. In H, we see defensive and protection, like in option F. So we are left with option J, which just says defensive walls, which is the most simple and succinct answer and therefore correct. In number 47, we're continuing at the same sentence. We are now looking at the phrase stood 10 meters tall. They were erected under different historical circumstances. We see here in the first option that we have two independent clauses that have been smashed together. They stood 10 meters tall and they were erected. So what we want to do is either add a conjunction or split it into two sentences. In the first one, that doesn't happen, so we know that that answer is wrong. The second answer does split the clauses, as do the third and fourth answers. Now, the key to this is the fact that at the beginning of this sentence, we have the word although. Although implies that we have a comparison. Although this happened, something else occurred. So we can conclude that the although makes the first part into a dependent clause, and therefore we need a comma, leaving option C as the correct answer. In 48, we're looking at the word its. Now, what we're saying is it's thought that the Servian wall. So what we're saying is that it is thought, not the possessive. It's thought. We're saying it is thought. The first one is the correct conjunction. We look at the other ones, we don't want to say it's because these two versions of it's are a possessive form, like it's thought, the thought of it, and this one is just not a correct grammatical term, which leaves us again with letter F. In number 49, we're describing again the Aurelian Wall. So we say the Aurelian Wall, built in the late 3rd century CE by the Roman Emperor Aurelian, was more sturdier than the older wall. Now what we're looking at is the Aurelian Wall built in the late 3rd century. So we don't want to say the Aurelian Wall had been built because we're talking about it in a more present tense. So it's not had been, so we can get rid of that one. It's not the Aurelian Wall which built, because again, not grammatically correct. We wouldn't say which built in the late 3rd century, so we can get rid of that one. So that leaves us with just options A and D. The problem with D is that we're not, in order to use the word was, it would just be a sentence. We'd say the Aurelian Wall was built in the late 3rd century. Because the sentence continues, we're left with option A, which says the Aurelian Wall built in the late 3rd century by the Roman Emperor Aurelian was older, and therefore we stick with A. In number 50, we're looking at specifically the phrase more sturdier than. Now, the word sturdier already implies that it's more sturdy, because sturdier means more sturdy. So, with that in mind, we can get rid of both options F and H, because we don't want to say more sturdier. So then we're just left with much sturdier than and much sturdier than. When we're making a comparison, as we are here, we want to use the A, than, not then, which means this happened and then this happened. So we're going to go with option letter G, which says much sturdier than, not much sturdier than. Question 51 is asking where we want to put the phrase greatly expanded. It's originally placed here at letter marker A. It was 19 kilometers long, greatly expanded, and surrounded the city of Rome. But what we're trying to say is that Rome is what was greatly expanded. So if we put it here, it's not really describing anything. If we just say it was 19 kilometers long, greatly expanded, it's just left. We don't know what's greatly expanded. If we put it here, it says, and surrounded the greatly expanded city of Rome. That sounds pretty good. If we look at C, it says the city of Rome greatly expanded, which implies that it's surrounding Rome, but in English we usually put our adjectives as greatly expanded is before the noun, so it's probably not C, and we agreed it's not A, so we'll go look at D. And here, if it says, as well as the small section of the greatly expanded Tiber's west bank, well, we're not saying that Tiber is greatly expanded, we're saying that Rome is. So that leaves us with B. Okay. In question 52, we're given the two sentences. The Aurelian Wall featured 18 large gateways permitting both foot and chariot traffic in and out of the city. In other words, a series of 381 towers and 11 smaller side gates called posterns were evenly spaced along the rest of the wall. So, essentially what we're trying to understand is how are we comparing 18 large gateways to this series of 381 towers? If we leave it as it is in option F, we're saying that the 18 large gateways are the same as the series of 381 towers, and those aren't. They're two separate things. In option G, we're saying that these gateways essentially lead to these towers. We have these gateways, therefore there are these towers, and it's not a cause and effect, so we can get rid of that one. In option H, we're given instead, so that's almost as if we either have one or the other, but what we're saying is we have both. We have both the gateways and the towers, not the 18 instead of the 381, so it's not that. So, since we agree that we have both, but it's not the same thing, it's not a comparison, we're left with option J, which just is saying these are two separate facts. We've got the 18 large gateways, and we've got a series of 381 towers. In number 53, we're looking at the grammar of the phrase, both the posterns and the towers served as defensive positions. In the first one, we're just saying both the posterns and the towers. In the second one, we're looking at some commas. So here, what it's essentially adding is an aside. So we would say both the posterns and the towers served as defensive positions. So the sentence, when we put the commas like this, is saying that the phrase both served as defensive positions is correct, which is an acceptable answer, so we'll look at that one. This one says both the posterns and the towers served as defensive positions. This one is wrong because both the posterns is not a sentence. If we're going to put a comma between this phrase and the word and, then this has to be a sentence and this has to be a sentence. And while the towers served as defensive positions is a sentence, both the posterns is not. So we can rule out that one. This one, again, if we put the comma here, is saying that these can be taken as two separate sentences. Both the posterns and the towers served as defensive positions. Since this is not a sentence, again, we can rule out option letter D. So that takes us back to A and B. Now, what we're looking at here is, do we want to say both the posterns and the towers, or do we want to say both the posterns and the towers? And because of what the word both means, it implies that we're talking about two things, so we don't actually need the comma. It's just an adjective describing posterns and an adjective describing towers. So it's option A because we're just saying both the posterns and the towers, because it could also just be the posterns and the towers. So it's A. 54 is asking about specificity. So we've been given four options. One is that both the posterns and the towers served as defensive positions for protecting Rome. So we know they're defensive positions, but that's about all the information we have. In option G, we're given they serve as defensive positions by providing cover for armed guards during an enemy attack. So we've got armed guards and enemy attack. In H, we are told that they were defensive positions in that they were designed to help Rome repel enemy attacks. Again, not very specific. All we know is that they repel attacks, but they don't give us much more detail outside of that. J says by keeping Rome safe from invaders. Again, not very specific. So we're left again with option G, which says that they provide cover for armed guards during an enemy attack, the most specific of the options. In number 55, we're given, again, some options. So we look at the two potential sentences. Or we look at the sentence that we're given as well as the sentence that comes after. So the sentence we're given is the Romans used bricks to build the Aurelian Wall. However, only small portions of the Servian Wall remain. Now, if we think about that, it's just two separate sentences. They used bricks for the Aurelian and small portions of the Servian Wall remain. So that would be A. If we look at B, it says, today the Aurelian Wall continues to dominate the Aurelian landscape. However, only small portions of the Servian Wall remain. Now that word, however, is the key phrase that we're looking at here. Because what we need for this to be correct is we need the first sentence to contrast with the second sentence. So option B is looking nice because it says, the Aurelian Wall continues to dominate. However, only small portions of the Servian Wall are left. But let's look at C and D before we come to our final conclusion. So C says that Emperor Aurelian did not survive long enough to see the completion of the Aurelian Wall. This isn't a comparison of the two walls, so we can rule that out. If we look at D, it says before the Servian and Aurelian walls were built, ancient Rome was most likely protected by mounds of earth. Again, not a comparison. So that takes us back to B, which says that the Aurelian Wall continues to dominate, however, only the Servian Wall remains. So that gives us answer B for number 55. Number 56 is looking at the small portions. So we've got only small portions of the Servian Wall remains is what we're given in answer F. But what we're talking about is the Servian Wall. So when we've got a singular, like I or he or Matt or the Servian Wall, we want to say remain. Or in question 56, we're looking at the phrase, only small portions of the Servian Wall remains. In question 56, we're looking at how to end the phrase, only small portions of the Servian Wall, and then we're either given remains, were remaining, has remained, or remain. Now this one's a bit tricky because we've got two nouns here. We've got small portions and we've got Servian Wall. Now, if we were to look at just Servian Wall, we would say some of the Servian Wall remains, because this is a singular. You've only got one, the Servian Wall, it remains. But because we're actually talking here about small portions of the Servian Wall, this is a plural. And when we're talking about plurals, we want to use remain. And the easy way to think about that is if you've got an S on the noun, then you don't have an S on the verb. So we can get rid of remains because it's small portions remain. And then that one immediately takes us down to J here. But if we look at these other two, just to make sure that they're not correct, we wouldn't say were remaining because we're talking about today. And we wouldn't say has remained because that's just not grammatically correct. You might say remained if you're talking about in the past, but you never say has remained. That's not correct. So we're going to go back down to J because we're saying that only small portions remain. 57, we're deciding if we want to add a statement. So the statement is, to hasten the construction of the Aurelian Wall, existing architectural features such as aqueducts were incorporated into the structure. Now, if we remember, the section we're talking about right now is today. What does the Aurelian Wall seem like today? So, with that in mind, it doesn't make sense to really add the sentence. So, we look down at options C and D, which say no, we're not adding it. And if we look at C, it says no, because it provides a detail that interrupts the paragraph's discussion of the wall in the present day. Using that, we're left with option C as the correct answer. Looking at question 58, we are talking about the parts of the wall that still remain. So what we say is we're talking about Rome, and we say that once protected, and then we either have the future capital, what was yet appointed to be the designation of capital, that once protected, what that would in reality become the capital, and that once protected, a would be but not yet capital. As you can see, it's really hard to read these three options, so already it leads us to think that it's going to be option F. Now, if we look further, these ones are wordy but don't really explain what the capital is. What was yet appointed to the designation of? I don't know what I'm being told here. What would in reality become the capital? Well, we know it's the capital. We don't need to say in reality. The future already implies that. If we look at A would be but not yet, again, this is a very wordy way of saying what is to become the future capital. So we're left here with option F, which is just the future capital. Number 59 looks at the irony. So what we are given at the beginning of this sentence is, it could perhaps be considered ironic that remnants of the wall that once protected the future capital of the ancient world's most famous empires are now preserved, and then we're given our options. So we can say that they are preserved and recognized as historically significant by archaeologists, that they are preserved as important relics of Rome's earliest boundaries, that they are preserved within a fast food restaurant, and that they are preserved in such varied locations. Now, what we're talking about is irony, and so since we are comparing a strong capital to something different in order for it to be ironic, we're left with option C, which is a fast food restaurant, because it is ironic that what is the future capital is preserved in a fast food restaurant. Finally, for option 60, we're hoping to add the statement, the two walls can be thought of as concentric circles emanating from the ancient Roman Forum. So we're given four potential places. The first potential place is in the first paragraph. We're talking about two ancient walls that when they were built surrounded the city in two concentric circles. In option B, we are saying the 11-kilometer wall, we're talking about the Servian wall, encircled Rome's 7 hills and stood entirely on the east side of the Tiber River, and again, we're saying that they're concentric circles. If we look at option C, we're saying that the second wall, the Servian wall, the Aurelian wall, protected Rome while the army was away, while defending the empire's far-flung frontiers from enemy attacks, and that they were concentric circles. And if we put it in place D, it's right before we describe the Aurelian wall's architecture. So, since we want to do it in the introduction, when we're just talking about the two walls and how they're placed, we're left with option A, which again says, Rome, founded on the banks of the Tiber River, boasts two ancient walls that when they were built surrounded the city. The two walls can be thought of as concentric circles emanating from the ancient Roman Forum. Is the most succinct and best way of doing that one. So that is option F. As you can see, this section, we were looking today at questions 49 through 60, which is the fourth passage of the English practice test number 1. And the biggest pieces we want to talk about is understanding where commas go, understanding how to be succinct with our use of language, use of adjectives, and probably most importantly, placement of grammatical structures. So I hope that